Joining us this evening. I'm Katie Lee Colvin. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator for the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum of Art, located next door. And the music, I don't know if y'all heard some of the music as you were coming in, but it is an original composition created by Houston Guy in response to his experience in seeing the Facing Fire exhibition. We didn't commission him to do this piece. He just did it on his own accord, having been really moved by the exhibition and having lived out west much of his life. So thank you, Houston, for that. And after the panel, please join us at the museum to see the exhibition if you haven't seen it yet, to share a story about fire if you have one at our story booth, enjoy some food, and you can hear Houston perform. Tonight's panel discussion was organized in conjunction with the exhibition Facing Fire, Art, Wildfire, and the End of Nature in the New West. The exhibition provides a visual and material experience about how fire is impacting us today and how artists are responding to it. The exhibition was organized by UC Irvine and curated by Doug McCulloch. It aligns with the NEMA mission to foster engagement with modern and contemporary art, to facilitate learning and promote dialogue about ideas that are important to the people of Utah and the mission of Utah State University. As an academic museum, we strive to encourage innovative forms of pedagogy across disciplines to garner learning that makes a lasting impact. And one of the ways that we do this is through collaboration. So I want to thank Brian Steed and Anna McIntyre from the Janet Quinney Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air, and Carrie Brinkhurst from Utah Public Radio for helping to make this possible. I also want to thank our supporters, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, Utah Humanities, the Janet Quinney Lawson Foundation, Rick Lawson Foundation, and the S.J. and Jesse E. Quinney Foundation, who help make programs like this possible. I'd also like to thank our members. Many of you here tonight are members of the museum or members of Utah Public Radio or members of both. And if you're not, I would encourage you to look at the member benefits we offer and consider joining. I feel very fortunate to have such a wonderful support system here at Utah State from the Executive Vice President, Robert Wagner, my boss, the senior leadership at Utah State, and the NEMA Advisory Board. And finally, I want to thank my staff. I have an awesome team and enjoy every day that we work and make an impact together. In particular, Shaylee Bryans, who has worked hard in helping me to organize this event. The wonderful Ellen Rossi, who serves on the foundation boards of the Emma Eccles Jones Foundation, the S.J. and Jesse E. Quinney Foundation, and the Janet Quinney Lawson Foundations, had planned to be here this evening, but due to unforeseen circumstances could not, and she wanted me to share these remarks on her behalf. The opening of this exciting new exhibit marks yet another occasion where NEMA becomes an epicenter for exploration and discussion here at Utah State. Fire is a huge part of our story here in the American West, and Facing Fire has the power to encourage us as the audience to consider the complexities and different viewpoints through a new lens. As Utah's land-grant university, USU is exactly the place to tell these stories and elevate the inter- and cross-disciplinary work that the study of fire requires. I am particularly excited about the collaboration with the Janet Quinney Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air. Fire in all its complexities must continue to be researched and better understood so that policies can be put in place to protect our wildlife, habitats, and natural resources for future generations to enjoy, and an exhibit such as this helps elevate this very important work. Thank you to the artists and the curators for creating this collection of works and for sparking this meaningful dialogue. So that was from Ellen Rossi again. And before we get into more details about this evening's panel, I am very honored to have us joining this evening President Betsy Cantwell, who is now in her position, I think, 6 weeks. Please help me welcome President Cantwell.
Thank you, Katie. Woo, you really can't see anything from here. You guys could be doing anything out there. I'm going to tell you a couple stories because I'm particularly excited about being the president of a university that gathers this kind of capacity for our community and demonstrates to our students that this is kind of how it's done. This is how complicated challenges in a complex world get worked, get thought about, get represented, get out into our collective memory. So I've lived through 3 major cataclysmic fires. First, the Oakland fire in 1991, which I actually don't really know, but in my adult life, that was the first time I was aware of a fire of that scale and magnitude affecting an urban area like that. 3,000 homes were burned. It stopped about a quarter mile from the home that I was living in. Then I also lived through 2 fires in Los Alamos, New Mexico. I built a home on a burn lot. I evacuated horses. That fire entered my community and burned my home. And then I lived in Tucson, Arizona during COVID when there was a fire in our mountains that burned for 4 months. It didn't get down to my community only because it was such a desert community that there really wasn't enough to burn to get down into the place where the homes were. But we literally watched flames for 4 months burning and ended up with things like bighorn sheep in our backyard because they were pushed out of their 9,000-foot home down to our 2,000-foot residence. So I feel very much like I'm not unique. There are people everywhere who live this, who experience it. We're very, very fortunate to have artists who give us a representation that really allows us to do 2 things. One, not forget, and the other is to continue to have that kind of immediacy of we have got to work this out. We've got to think about it. I'm an engineer. I tend to think about these things through the lens of technology and science and climate change, but we are in a moment where this is exactly what we should be doing. I frankly had an almost impossible time watching the videos associated with this event, but I encourage you to do that if it doesn't bring PTSD to you, and don't if it does, because nothing is worth that. But we really need to bring all of our students, all of our families, all of our community to these kinds of discussions. So I'm really glad to be able to welcome you, and I very much hope that this has the kind of resonance and meaning, and I know that Katie does these kinds of things all the time, that we bring these to you and that's how you think about part of the value of Utah State University. Thanks.
Thank you, President Cantwell, and thank you for sharing those stories. Turning now to our panel, I would like to share some facts about fire that were provided to us by Professor Larissa Yoakum, who is our she's our USU fire ecologist, and she does a lot of work throughout the state. But she is enjoying Spain on sabbatical right now. So before she left, I asked Larissa if she could send me some things to share. The Federal Wildland Fire Agency began tracking wildfire data in 1983, 40 years ago. That wasn't really that long ago. And in that year, the total acres burned was just over 1.3 million. In 2022, just over 7.5 million acres burned by wildland fire. And 80% of all wildland fires on BLM lands, Bureau of Land Management lands, are caused by humans. Those are pretty arresting facts that should give us pause. Artists respond to the world around them, and fire has been a subject for many artists for centuries across many cultures and in many forms. Fire is used to create some art forms, such as ceramics and glass. The exhibition, Facing Fire, features 12 contemporary artists working across a variety of media, and each of their approaches, experiences, and responses to fire are very different. Tonight, we will start by hearing from two of the artists in the exhibition, and I'm going to provide an introduction for each of them, and then they're going to come up and talk about just a few of their works so that you can understand where they're coming from, and then we'll bring the panel on stage and get the conversation going. Samantha Fields was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1972. After receiving her BFA from the Cleveland Institute of Art and her MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art, she moved to Los Angeles, and she's currently a professor of art and the interim associate dean of the Mike Curb College of Arts, Media, and Communication at California State University, Northridge. She has received numerous awards, and her work has been collected and exhibited at noted public institutions such as the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, the Carolyn Campagna Kleefield Contemporary Art Museum at Cal State University, Long Beach, Cranbrook Art Museum, and Irvine Fine Arts. Noah Berger is a freelance photographer who has spent 20 years covering California for editorial, corporate, and government clients. He works regularly for the Associated Press, the San Francisco Chronicle, Bloomberg News, the New York Times, and others. Berger started his editorial career at University of California, Berkeley's The Daily Californian and the Oakland Tribune. As he describes it, it was through the student paper that I had my first ever assignment. I was 18 years old and completed 5 or 6 shoots, which earned me $150. This was what got me hooked working with newspapers. Wildfires are a specialty, as are politics, natural disasters, and public protest. His work focuses on staying open to new ways of shooting and thinking. He says, quote, "I've been a photographer for a long time, so when I take photographs, I imagine an audience residing in another city. I generally look for single images that convey the story as standalone photographs." So please help me welcome Samantha and then Noah to speak about their works.
Okay. Ooh, you're right. It is very dark up here. Can't see anything. I have some notes here. Give me one second. So I do have some happy news that I am no longer the interim associate dean at my college. In the time that I sent the bio to Katie, I am back as chair of the art department at Cal State Northridge, so happily so. So first, before I start, I'd like to thank Katie and Maren and Zach and Shaylee and everybody here at the museum for making this possible. I am so happy to be back in Utah. And I thought I'd start my remarks with this image up here, which is not in the show, but it started my work about fire. So back in 2006, I was doing an artist residency in Nebraska during storm season because I was making work about severe weather driven by climate change. Basically, I went out storm chasing. My husband loved this, by the way. After the residency, I decided to drive home on a road trip, and with SD cards full of images that were going to be the next 2 years of my work, I saw this. So this is just north of Cedar City. I had never seen a plume like this before. There was no wind that day, and it rose straight up and dispersed, and it looked a bit like an A-bomb had gone off. What is in my path, I wondered. So I spent the day photographing this and spent the night in Cedar City. The next morning, I drove through the smoldering ruins that had jumped the freeway, and I think it's safe to say that this became a really formative moment in my practice. This is the first wildfire that I photographed. It's the first wildfire that I painted. So it's especially meaningful for me to come back to Utah today, to be in the show, and to also talk about this work. So that year, I got home, and for the next several years, California experienced increasingly savage fires. The annual fire report changed names, becoming the Fire Siege Report, and the one-page synopsis became a 30-page document. During this time, which is when I made most of the work that you will see in the show afterwards, I just kept all my gear in my trunk because fires broke out so frequently that, you know, I would be going to the grocery store, but now I see that plume, I'm gonna head out there and I'm gonna photograph that fire. It was best to be prepared for anything. So to give you a little context, ooh, that's a happy trigger. There we go. My paintings look like photographs, but they're not. They are all acrylic on canvas. I make them with a variety of airbrushes, essentially painting atmosphere with atmosphere. I don't really touch my paintings. A lot of people think my paintings are photographs, but they are not. I consider my paintings rather to be in conversation with photography because all of my work really starts with the photograph. I sometimes spend several months shooting photographs before I even go into the studio to paint, although I never show the photographs. So those are my tools up there. Those are my girls, as I call them, all of my airbrushes and some paints. And then this piece is in the show. So this painting is called Every Place, Everywhere, and is from the Triangle Complex fire in Yorba Linda in California. In this piece, I removed the landscape. So this is a much later fire. Like the first one I showed you was the first one, and this one is several years later. So in this one, I removed the landscape from the painting so that the plane, which is the DC-10 that drops retardant on the fires, feels vulnerable and very small, too small for this monumental task. By the time I made this piece, it felt like there was fire everywhere. And while wildfire is often seen in media as a Californian or a Western problem, fire disasters in Australia, Greece, and more recently, Canada and Maui reify the issue of climate change-driven wildfire as a global issue. After the Camp Fire, which destroyed the town of Paradise, and the last Malibu burn, I stopped actively photographing fires, meaning I stopped running towards them. It became too dangerous, and the evacuations too crucial. The fires move so fast now that there is no escape. My larger creative practice deals with disaster as a whole. So fire is kind of one area that I work in. I deal with personal disaster, political disaster, and ecological disaster. So unfortunately, I never suffer from a lack of material. These days, I document fire only when it's in my path, which is very often the case, much like the first fire painting that I showed you here tonight. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Noah Berger.
Hey there, I can see you guys a little bit. Who's seen the exhibit out here? Has anybody been over there yet? Okay, so some of you guys. Cool, I'm gonna start a timer because I'd rather leave Q&A time than talk for too long. Okay, so I'm a news photographer actually for 30 years out of California, and I dropped out of Berkeley in 1995 and started doing it full-time freelance then, but been doing that my whole career. Around 2013 was when I got interested in fire. We had the Rim Fire outside of Yosemite, which at the time was kind of cataclysmic. It burned 250,000 acres. Not too many homes, but at the time that was a huge fire. In the years since then, California has just ramped up, and now that's almost nothing on our radar for our fires. One of the reasons you see news photography out of California, I don't know if that's ever struck you, you don't really see these photos from Utah or Colorado or Idaho that have a lot of fire also, is that we've guaranteed press access in California. It's written into the penal code. Can everybody hear? Am I close enough? By the way, okay. It's written into the penal code that press can get into closed areas, which is great for news photographers. There's some downsides for crews and residents and other people also, but it really lets us create these images that don't come out of other states. So since I've been doing it, a wild statistic from CAL FIRE, which is our state agency, is that, do I need to go higher? Oh.
No, I'm just going to put a couple
Okay,
of images.
there you go, thank you. In California, according to CAL FIRE, 18 of the 20 most destructive wildfires have occurred in the last 20 years. It's a pretty wild statistic. And that's in terms of homes lost. If you look at land lost, it's about the same. When you look at deaths, it's a little different, but 18 out of 20 of the most destructive are in the last 20 years. I've covered 16 of those. And how I do it is I work with the team. We're kind of competitors. We work for different news agencies and newspapers, but we work together. We'll ride together. We have radios to communicate. We share info. Fire crews have a really robust system for keeping each other safe and covered, and we have kind of a smaller version of that. We're often living out of our cars for 5 or 6 days at a time, sleeping in the car, carry everything you need except for gas to be in there. And we're dressed like firefighters. So you can see the preview image was my buddy Justin, who also has work in the show. Full safety gear, Nomex, fire shelters. We got 2 minutes here. Okay. Some of the tools that we use, the biggest is their fire scanner, where you can hear crews talking, and it kind of tells you where the hot spots are and where they expect to make stands and what will be the most visual areas. There are also a lot of online tools. If you guys live in fire-prone areas, there are a lot of things you can do to track fires, like heat maps on Google Earth, plane trackers to tell where the drops are going to be, fire forecast, lightning tracker to tell areas that are likely to have new ignitions. There's a lot out there for resources. Let's see what else. And one of the questions get asked a lot is about safety, and fire, despite what the photos look like, it's actually probably not the most dangerous thing I do. Some of the riots and protests are more dangerous. Kind of like what firefighters do is we always keep in mind the exit route and safety zones. Like, I'm not sure if it's probably not what the fire service follows, but if you have like half a football field of cleared land, it could be a parking lot, it could be vegetation, free, dirt. Usually we'll feel okay riding out most conditions there. There was a fire, the Carr Fire in 2018, which kind of shook that up for those of us who photograph fires as well as for the fire crews. And I was there, and it was there when a fire tornado whipped up. It was something like 143-mile-an-hour winds as the fire came down out of the hills. And it killed 3 firefighters and just really kind of shook everyone's idea of what safety looks like, because there's nothing you can do. No amount of training or knowledge or preparation will really help you if you get hit by something like that. So it's gotten a little scarier since then, I think, for everybody to be out there. Some of the other things, we got 4 minutes, I'm very close. Some of the other challenges out there, always struggling to get Wi-Fi and to transmit photos when you're working for a wire service. I'm usually for AP. You need to get photos out fast, so struggling for that. The other thing that's seen in recent years that makes it hard is that residents used to mostly welcome the press. A lot of these fires in California are in the more conservative areas. They just tend to be more rural than urban. And it used to be that people would welcome it. I would get messages on Facebook while I was at a fire. Hey, you photographed my house burning. Did you see if my goats were there? Did you see if the shed was there? Things like that. And really in the last 4 or 5 years, it's become a little bit more hostile, and it's kind of hard because we face sometimes very open hostility, or just knowing that people who are residents and who are losing stuff are not appreciating the coverage is a little bit hard. Kind of struggle with that in the current climate. Hopefully that changes, because it doesn't feel good to be adding one more bad thing to something going on with the community. And I'm going to stop there and leave the time for the panel and Q&As hopefully after. Cool.
So I'd like to welcome the panel onto the stage. And as you all come on, I'm going to, there's a couple more images of, oh, sorry, it didn't advance. That's okay. Well, the clicker's not, there we go. There's a couple more images of Noah's work. Oh, this is a very temperamental clicker. I'm going to just leave those up. And I'd like to introduce Brian Steed, who is moderating the panel for us tonight. And then he's going to introduce the other panelists that you haven't met yet. So Brian is the executive director of the Janet Quinny Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air. And he is also appointed by Governor Cox as the commissioner of the Great Salt Lake. No small task. Previously, Brian was Executive Director of the Utah Department of Natural Resources and Deputy Director for the Bureau of Land Management. So I'll turn it over to Brian now, and I look forward to seeing what you all talk about.
Thanks, Katie. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening and discuss what is really a visceral but also a really important issue facing the Western United States and I would say globally. Really excited to have this discussion tonight. And I have to say on a personal note, so I'm the executive director of this thing called the Janet Quinney Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air. The Institute was set up in large measure to kind of bring together disparate views, disparate disciplines, and have robust conversations about meaningful things. And I think this panel and this opportunity to discuss the show really illustrates that kind of cross-disciplinary discussion, and it's really exciting to have this panel of experts here. We've already met Samantha Fields and Noah Berger. I get to introduce the rest. Jamie Phillips Barnes, Jamie, wave. Okay, is the director of the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. She's been with the division for over 11 years and been the director for just over 2, is that right?
That's right.
Before this important role, she oversaw Utah's sovereign lands, and that includes the underlying area beneath things like Great Salt Lake. So I get to work with Jamie a lot. Jamie holds a Master's of Natural Resources degree from the University of Idaho. In my previous role as Department of Natural Resources, I worked with Jamie on a day-to-day basis, and there's no one that knows fire and the various issues around fire better than she does. So thank you. Please join me in welcoming Jamie. Next, Eric LaMalfa. He's a professor of ecology here at Utah State University. Before that, he was a fuels management specialist, both at the U.S. Forest Service as well as the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. And I have to say, he's cooler than the rest of us because he's also researched fire in a lot of amazing places, including Africa, which is where the balance of his dissertation was done, doing really meaningful work there. Please join me in welcoming Eric. And last but not least, Wade Snyder is the Deputy State Fire Management Officer, and that's a job that really puts him at the front lines of fire response. Before he took on that role, he actually helped found the Alta Hot Shots. For those that don't know, Hot Shots are these really crack team of experts that are able to go and respond first when fires break out, or often the tip of the spear when it comes to firefighting. And they are really, really, really mean and bad people. No, they're good. They're good people. Okay, no. Really tough job and really amazing work. So we're really happy to have him here as an expert, as the person that's been at fighting fires for a lot of his life. So thank you, Wade, for being here. Okay, so now we get to turn to the questions, and I'm going to start with Wade because we've seen this is an interesting discussion tonight. We've seen really the destructive nature of fire. I know that you have been out and about on some of these really intimidating fire situations, but also we're here talking about art. So I'm curious, as your response as a firefighter, is there something positive or something beautiful that comes out of fire? I'm curious.
Well, after training firefighters for a long time, I will say it takes a lot of repetition to teach them to not just stare at the fire the whole time. I think all of us have sat around a campfire before, and everybody wants to watch that fire dance around. It's beautiful. It makes a great backdrop. But as firefighters, we want to watch, we lost that one already. Let's look at what's going to burn next. Where's the next ember going to land? Let's jump on that before it becomes something that we can't control, generally speaking. But after walking through the exhibit, it did bring up some different emotions as far as the beauty that it can be, the devastation that it can cause. I think after being in fire for about 25 years now, for me, when I look at something, it's kind of like when you think about what the original pioneers thought. Like, did they look at the land and love the land, or love what that land can do? And when I look at a fire now, I'm like, oh, this fire sucks. It's going to burn down these houses. This is going to be a really difficult fire. Or that's a good looking fire. It's backing down the hill. It's cleaning out the understory. It's not taking all the trees, you know? So I think for me, that's kind of how I look at fire now. And it kind of, I mean, just naturally moves towards the ecology of what that fire is doing. Is this good fire, right place, right time, or bad fire, wrong place, wrong time?
Thanks. Let's start with the artists. Samantha, Noah, what do you hope to accomplish when you create these types of works? I mean, we spent, I don't know, an hour before walking through and swapping stories on fire and whatever else. I'm curious what you hope, or what do you hope that people walk away with when they see your art? And I'll start with, Noah, do you want to go first?
So I keep it pretty open. I don't really have a particular viewpoint I'm trying to put out there. I'm capturing this and letting it be used by different writers, whether it's news stories, opinion pieces, policy pieces. And I'm not coming at it from a perspective of something I'm trying to show people in general, other than the reality of what is. The first thing in news photography is that you need to be honest. We are showing peak action. I mean, just because you see these flames doesn't mean the entire town is burning, so you're showing kind of the most sparky areas of a blaze. But the main thing is to document it honestly and truthfully, and for me, just let other people take what they will from that.
Awesome. What do you think, Samantha?
You know, I would say from a bigger point of view, it's to have conversations like this. Like, I like to talk about this subject. I think it's a really important subject, and art is often a prompt to start a conversation. Personally, I think that, you know, disaster in general and fires in particular, they're sublime, you know, and you feel very small in the face of it. And for me, when I'm looking at big weather, or I'm looking at, you know, a hillside on fire or a giant plume on the horizon, it helps me kind of see how small I am in the larger scheme of things. And I hope my viewers get that too. I hope they look at it and they also kind of feel that scope of nature and the power of nature.
Thanks. I have to say, in commenting on both the work that I was able to go see before, go see it. It really is, it's really remarkable. And, you know, I've worked around fire for a lot of my professional career, whether it was Bureau of Land Management or Department of Natural Resources. And there's a real sense of time and scale that you capture. And so really, thanks so much. And thanks for sharing it with us. Jamie, let's talk about something. Katie mentioned some of the fire facts from Dr. Larissa Yoakum. I know that Forestry Fire State Lands works with her sometimes. So let's talk about this. Are humans doing a better job messaging about the dangers of human-caused wildfire? I know it's something that you and I worked on a lot when we were at the state. Has there been any drastic changes in the investment when it comes to communications on those issues? What do you think?
Yeah, here in Utah, we're definitely doing a better job on messaging on fire. We're in the 4th year of our Fire Sense campaign. That's really been an awesome campaign. And although it's hard to link that campaign is really making the reduction in human-caused fires, we'll take it. We're seeing a decline in human-caused fires by about 50% overall. And it's a struggle to educate people and also to message this in the right way. We don't want messaging fatigue, but then we also want to message that fire isn't necessarily always bad, but we want to have the right kind of fire. When we were walking through the exhibit talking earlier, you know, I think Wade made a comment of, we take fire with us everywhere. And that's the thing that we need to educate people on, is what actually can start a fire. You know, we see roadside starts that can turn into a catastrophic wildfire. And it's just those activities and recreation that we do every day that can then turn into a wildfire. And that's something, educating people on a flat tire, your catalytic converter, your chains that you're dragging on your trailer. Those things can start a wildfire. And it's really important that people are aware and they know what's going on out there and why we're seeing wildfires that are human-caused.
So if people wanted to know more about the Fire Sense campaign, where would they go see that?
To firesense.org, and there's great messaging on there. There's some great videos that they can look at, and just education in general of how we're trying to message out human-caused wildfires.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Eric. Yeah, I know. I'm going to you. So we're talking about fire, but really there's conditions that are required to create a wildfire, and also we've talked about this here, good wildfire, bad wildfire. So when you see a fire, what are you as an ecologist thinking? What would you like us all to be thinking about as well?
Yeah, I've been thinking about wildfire for a long time, starting from being a little boy that was curious about and playing with matches. And yeah, and I have that that fascination and appreciation for it, just its raw beauty. Like when you see a fire and just the raw power of nature. And for anybody who's been like close to a rolling crown fire, it's like a steam engine. I mean, it's just so powerful. And so, I mean, I'm human first and foremost. It's awe-inspiring. So it's really cool to see your work with regards to that. It's triggered some serious memories for me. But as an ecologist, I'm thinking about the management of these ecosystems, and they're very diverse, and roles fire in different ecosystems really depends on the climate, the evolutionary history of the plants and animals. But anymore, that stuff has really gotten jumbled up with invasive species and different human values, ecosystem services that we're managing for. And so when I'm looking at a fire, I'm thinking about, I mean, very simply, the intensity and the severity of the fire and kind of what its effects are going to be on the soils, the vegetation, and how that's going to affect the recovery of the ecosystem, what kinds of post-fire management practices, will benefit the ecosystem. But there's, I mean, the one kind of common theme that's emerged is there's no putting these fire regimes back. There's no going, we study fire history and it gives us valuable insights, but we're entering this time in human history where we've jumbled up things like cheatgrass in the Great Basin have drastically altered that system, and the best we can hope for
Is.
Okay, cheatgrass, and so bufflegrass is another one. But these are grasses that have come from Europe and Asia. Cheatgrass is an annual grass, and essentially what it does is it fills in the gaps between plants. And so in the Great Basin, we evolved with a bunchgrass community. So there's a few species of bunch grasses, and they grow in clumps. And fire is very natural in the Great Basin. But historically, the best we can reconstruct is we would have these small, 100 or 1,000 acre fires on 30 to 100 year return intervals. But because cheatgrass fills in those gaps, those fires move so fast, they're now tens, hundreds of thousands of acres. And the plants that come back, those bunch grasses, they'll survive, but the cheatgrass comes back even better. And so over time, the fire frequency is increased, and we've replaced what used to be sagebrush and sage grouse habitat for a monoculture of annual grasses that's not palatable for livestock or wildlife, and really give us no ecosystem services. They're bad for the watershed, they're bad for the wildlife, bad for the air quality when they burn.
So let me ask you this, and this is to everybody, not just to Eric. I mean, I think that what we're trying to do here is to have a discussion about kind of the dangers of wildfire, but also kind of that there are good things. Obviously, there are fire-dependent species. And I guess I'm trying to figure out how we can live with fire, how to become more resilient in the face of really changing circumstances, as well as really a changed fire regime, it seems. What do y'all think? Don't all speak at once. Jamie, go ahead.
Well, I'll take it. I think there's an education component to that one of teaching people what good fire is and what bad fire is. Managing better on the landscape to become more resilient is something we need to continue to do, and we need to do better at that, honestly. Doing more prescribed burns, managing our forests, managing our ecosystems to the point that things can survive in them with fire and without. But then also, I like your term jumbled up, because that's exactly what's happened over the years, is everything has become jumbled up. We now have the urban sprawl. We have people pushing into the areas that they didn't live before. And that makes it very complex to manage these areas and the ecosystem in the best way that we can. And I think we've got to be able to do that, but it's a unique and delicate balance of how we live with fire.
Other thoughts?
On that a little bit, and you touched on it, but I mean, you can really, if there's the motivation to, you can build communities that are virtually resistant to fire. Defensible space, like Jamie said, construction, the roofing material, the gutters, clearing. There are things that you can do that can make communities survive most fires. It's more expensive, and a lot of people in these areas don't want to rebuild their homes or do that, so there's a lot of resistance to that. But it is something going forward, you know, that might be more palatable to people if communities keep getting lost and lives keep getting lost.
Of allowing natural starts to take natural course and accepting some of those potential consequences, and realizing that, you know, the entity that made the decision to let that run its course to save us all a lot of money and allow, you know, the understory to burn out and things like that. They're not the ones that built the house right in the way of where that fire would have naturally went. And that's a really challenging one for, I think, the agencies that have to make these decisions. And especially we're kind of, as the state, stuck in the middle of that, I think, sometimes, because we're kind of that middle ground between private and you know, the citizens of Utah and their interests versus the largest landowners in the state, which is the federal government. And that's the land that needs the most the most treatment. And the best and biggest treatments that you can do is going to be letting those fires run their course. But there's just so many impacts to people. I've struggled with that my whole life and my whole career. That's the reality of it. And you know, you go back even further, and we definitely put ourselves in this situation. We, you know, as we expand our private lands up into forest lands and don't have great building codes and don't do any maintenance in the forest. I mean, it's hard here in Utah with the lack of industry. You know, in some states they can sell the timber, you know, they can go in and harvest the timber and do good work there. But it's really challenging here in Utah because if you've ever been to Oregon, our trees are like a fifth, maybe a tenth of the size. So, I mean, why would we have big forests here? I mean, and then by the time you harvest a forest here, it'll never grow back in a lifetime. So it just doesn't make sense for industry. So some of those, that's one of the big challenges, I think, that, you know, when we talk about living with fire, that's what I mean, the reality is fire is the only natural disaster we throw a bunch of people at and spend a bunch of money at to try and knock it out. And everything else, we just get out of the way, we get out of the way of that hurricane in Louisiana, and we'll just build that house back 15, 20 more times. It's an interesting challenge that was something that we need to figure out how to be more resilient towards.
I never thought of it that way, but you're right. There isn't another natural disaster that put that money and resource into. Yeah, that's cool.
It's interesting. I have so many more questions, but I know that there's people in here in the audience that have questions as well. We've got microphones on either side. We would love to hear from you if you can, if you want to, and if not, you're just going to have to deal with us for another 12 more minutes. So I don't see anybody moving. Come on. Yeah, do you mind turning the house lights up so we can actually see people? Otherwise, I see 3 rows of nobody in the front, and then it's darkness.
There we go.
Why don't we go to this microphone first? That'd be great.
So our youngest son lives in Lake Tahoe and was hit with that large fire there just a couple of years ago, and we were staying there. Smoke got so bad that we finally couldn't breathe anymore. We were left, and then he was evacuated a day later. We left there, and we've been traveling on the road for the last 3 years, camping, BLM, state, national parks. Can't say enough about how beautiful they are. But we drove all the way up to the Tetons, and it was still smoke from the fires. Yet, in our campgrounds, people were still burning fires. We couldn't breathe because we'd just come out of such a bad situation. What can we do? I think it takes more than education to tell people that we need to stop having these kind of fires in our campgrounds.
Interesting. Jamie, I'm going to let you field that one. All the hard questions come to Jamie.
Yeah, I can definitely, we try to manage that here in Utah very well. When we put restrictions into place, that's one of the things we think of is where can people have campfires and where is that safe? The one thing that's very difficult to manage is that human component with campfires. You can have a campfire, we can teach you how to put that out properly, but there's some people who just don't do it. And it's a problem. And that's one of the things that our Fire Sense campaign has really focused on is here's a hundreds of 1,000-acre fire can start just from a campfire escaping. And we have that every year here in Utah where the campfires get away from them and all of a sudden now we've got, teams in here fighting fires. So it's definitely a concern. I agree it's not all an education component, but that is really where it starts, of educating people that something so small can turn into something so big.
And I'll say, I think there are some cultural components. People like having campfires. At the same time, you bring up an excellent point when it comes to the smoke that that fire brings, and that's something that we've become by far more aware of in recent years. And we've seen, even here in Utah, even when we've had relatively small fire years like the last two, still major smoke incidents from fires from longer away. And it's something I think that those air quality concerns are something we're going to have to take a really hard look at.
Well, and we have been to some campgrounds where they actually put signs on the grates saying that they cannot have campfires in those particular places. And I would personally love to see more of that in Utah.
Awesome, thanks.
Interesting one, I would say, because right after opposable thumbs, the fire is what gave us the advantage. And so when we, as a regulatory agency, and to some extent try and restrict people from doing stuff, we get so much pushback. It really makes it so we can't complete our mission. And so as much as we can, that's what's so cool about the Fire Sense campaign that Jamie brought up. It's a behavior change campaign. It's trying to get people to voluntarily change what they're doing rather than us having to go out there with the yardstick and smacking everybody on the back of the hand, which isn't really getting us anywhere.
I guess my question would be for Wade and probably Eric, but I have about 47 seasons in wildland firefighting, and I worked with these guys quite a bit. And as I look at the picture up there, I want to address this to the artist to let you know that it terrifies me. I hate fires. I'm terrified of them because for over 40 years, I was a frontline supervisor. I was a hotshot soup, I was a division soup, I was an ops chief, and there was nothing that scared me more than the thought of killing people on fire. And I've seen how fast these things can go and how they can turn on you despite the best planning, computer modules and everything. They do go bad, and when they go bad, they can go really bad. When I retired, the first thing I did was take a class in landscape painting because I wanted to be an artist, and I'd never wanted to see another fire again. I don't paint fires. I painted, they just really, really bother me. But my question to you folks, probably more to Eric and Wade, because I think they're both very wise and they have great experiences, is about timing. You know, you've talked a lot about we have to live with fire, but when do we have to live with fire? And when do we have to put it out? And I just want to get your thoughts on that. And that's my question.
Yeah, and that question is so complicated. That's why had to make the point that I think we have to build resilience around the decision makers that make that decision. One of the things we were talking about in the back when we were getting ready for this is if anybody thinks that they can predict weather more than 10 days out, they're naive to think that, because we can make all the best decisions for what conditions we think we have today. And, a backcountry fire, natural start. The Bald Pole fire is a good example of that happened here 6 years ago. And it was a backcountry fire that kind of smoldered around for about a week. And then we got some fall winds that pushed, I think we had red flags for like 3 days or 4 days in a row, which isn't that abnormal for us to have big winds in fall. And it pushed it right down to the community. So, I mean, in a matter of like a couple of days, that thing, well, in one day, I think it moved 3.5, 4 miles. And next thing you know, we're putting in dozer line behind Elk Meadows and Woodland Hills. And I think, there's another thing that I've heard of and talked about is that there's more thought around fall burning when you see that season-ending event coming, more towards like what maybe the Native Americans had done more of. And again, there's still, Scott, prefrontal burning, that's scary stuff. I mean, the wind's going to come right before the rain comes. So it's an extremely complicated question, but one other point I like to make is that the fires that we start down low, near the road. They usually run up the hill and they completely change the ecosystem. The natural starts that start up high, back down, have less intensity, are usually a cleaner fire. And then our ability to use prescribed fire and increasing that, scaling that up where it makes sense, and figuring out how to deal with the smoke issues that go along with that. I mean, it's very complicated. I can't even answer your question, Scott. You know that.
Eric.
I can answer it. So it's very easy.
That's why we invited you, Eric.
Scott, I'll do another short lecture on fire behavior. So fire behavior there's a triangle: fuels, weather, and topography. Those are the three variables that determine whether it's going to get up and romp and burn up the houses, or if it's going to sit and smolder and do nothing but good and clean up the understory. But of those three variables, the weather really drives the big question mark. And as soon, it's akin to asking the weatherman or woman, what's going to happen in 5 days? Is it going to rain or not? And that's really like the level of precision we have when it comes to predicting what a specific fire is going to do for some length of time into the future. We can guess, we have a pretty good idea of the 5-day forecast, but after that, the climate ensembles, they're all over the place, and you know that. The other thing I was going to mention is that the time to use fire, to use prescribed fire, is when the community and the stakeholders are all on board and they've all come together and they're all ready to do it. And so the cool stuff I got to do in East Africa was working with pastoral communities where historically, in the 70s, there was a Soviet regime kind of influenced the regime change. There was a military coup. And part of the fallout from that was a total ban on fire in the country of Ethiopia. And 30 years later, the Acacia drepanalobium, the East African equivalent of juniper, is thick as the juniper in some places of Utah. And there's very little grass. And the pastoralists there's charcoal evidence that they've been burning for 14,000 years at least. They're saying, we want fire back. We want that tool. And it takes policy change, and it takes people coming together, different stakeholders who have different interests in air quality or in the water quality, whatever, but everybody's got to come to the table. And sometimes it happens on a really small scale. It might be the people in Box Elder County are ready to do it, but you know, the people in Spanish Fork probably aren't this year after the big Nebo fire. So that's my thought, is it really comes back to people.
Speak to a minute about, because Scott's a painter. So, about fear. You know, this show is called Facing Fire. It could just as easily be called Facing Fear. You know, I make paintings about fire. I make paintings about severe weather. And ultimately, I think being afraid of the thing is part of the fascination of making the work, right? You're kind of facing that fear through art making. And I think that, you know, the role of art sometimes is to tackle the difficult things, not always the easy things. And so painting things that are hard to talk about and hard to think about and hard to live with, I think sometimes that's the best thing that art can do for society. So I am very afraid of the fires too, but I still paint them.
Thanks. We are almost out of time for this portion. Why don't we have one last question, and then we'll wrap up. So please.
I like to talk about solutions, and you talked about fuel being one of the main contributors, and the fireman talked about, he mentioned it very briefly, that is building codes. Being an engineer, I look at the materials that we build, whether it's a house or a business, and I went through an area, everything was burnt to the ground except for one house. It had a metal roof, and I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was brick or stone, but the walls. Now, if you build a house out of matchsticks, and if you have roof shingles that are, let me see, 90% of them are made out of, what is the material that it is? It's very flammable. I can't remember what it is, but it's something like road stuff that we use. But anyway, yeah, asphalt. And I mean, that's like tar. That's like very, very flammable. Instead of voluntarily, you just simply say, look, this is an area that the building codes are going to be. You build a building, you have to have fire resistance. It's not the complete solution, but I know somebody who's a firefighter, and they go in there, and I can't remember, I think it's juniper trees, but it's some tree that has a lot of oils in it, and they go out there and they trim it down to prevent, because those things hit and they're just like combustible and they go off. So if everybody built, and I know it's a little bit more expensive for the metal roof, and I don't think it is though for the brick stuff. But anyway, if Utah or the West or anywhere that's fire prone said, this is part of the solution, if you want to build here, this is the building code, and it'll help slow down this spread. So I don't know, what do you think of that idea, and what do you think, has anybody talked about it and you think it can pass?
Yeah, so I will tell you, this has been a hot topic in the legislature for about the last 2 years, is talking about the WUI area, talking about the wildland urban interface area, where you see people moving into these areas, that urban sprawl that we talked about, and then talking about how we can enforce that WUI code and who's adopted it and who's out there educating people. From my division's standpoint, it's a very tricky task to attack. There's a lot of people already in the WUI, but educating those landowners on what defensible space is and what you can do to try to save your home during a wildfire is something that we're trying to do. But then also, it's a capacity issue from a state perspective and a local perspective of who goes out there and enforces those codes and who makes sure that people are doing the right thing. I couldn't agree with you more that if we do the right thing, the chances of, you know, a home surviving in that area are better. But unfortunately, people moving into those areas is happening faster than the policy making is happening. And so that makes it very challenging.
Yeah, one idea is to go with the insurance guys and say, if you want to build here, fine, but you're going to pay through the roof.
The other thing to add to that, which I don't think anyone mentioned, is exit routes. I don't know if Utah's as big as California, but you have a lot of communities up there that have one way in, one way out. Or Paradise, which was our deadliest fire, had 3 roads out for 30,000 or so people. So I'm not sure if Utah's doing it, but to put in more exit routes to get the residents out. It's one thing when you lose homes or land, but you know, losing lives is a different ballgame.
Sure.
I'd say we've been investing on that side of the shop. I mean, that is, we've added a deputy fuels and bolstered our wildland urban interface program to try and ramp up our fuels programs, put more pressure on What we use here is called a cooperative wildfire system, where we use risk and historic fire costs to kind of determine a local political subdivision's contribution towards the effort. So, and we make them use that money locally to try and make that situation better. What was sold on to me was we're going to make it easier for firefighters to fight fire in that area. We're going to make them take that money that historically, and what most states, if not all states that do something similar, they just take the money and use that to pay for the big fires, because that, you know, we help cover for the local governments. Within that agreement, it is required that unincorporated counties have a WUI code in place, and we're really digging in. This is a 5-year-old program, so I mean we just had our first audit. We're really looking at how successful we've been there, because like Jamie said, we don't have like a strong regulatory branch. Traditionally, we've had one law enforcement officer assigned to our division, and one of the best ways to prevent fires is to investigate them and pursue recovery for fires that are caused by people illegally or for whatever purpose, just to shine a light on it and have some financial responsibility there. And we've ramped that up a little bit as well and tried to partner more, but we're with you. This is a real issue, and we need probably some political pull as well, because you said it costs more to build that way. It costs more to build a wide road and an escape route, to build a new community in the North Slope of the Uintas or wherever it might be. That's just an example. There's not a real community I'm aware of today that's going in, but and then that's the other problem. The community that went in yesterday is grandfathered in. The ones done before that. So how do you retrofit all that? Ton of infrastructure money and inflation reduction money and that coming through right now, and the Cooperative Wildfire Defense Grant money. We want to leverage that, and we think Utah's in a good place to do it, and we're getting the horsepower in place to help make great decisions there. And so I'm really hopeful over the next 5 years of all this money through grants coming in, that we'll be able to more directly address what you're talking about, because you're right.
Well, thank you so much for the question. I know there's more to talk about than we have time to talk about. The good news is the panelists have agreed to stay for a little bit anyway to talk if you have individual questions. To the artists, thank you so much for your work and for giving us a reason to come here tonight to talk about what is a really important issue. So thank you so much for being here, Samantha and Noah. To the other experts on the panel, thank you so much for your expertise and for dedicating your lives to learning more and being better. And so thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the panelists. And now that we've talked about it, let's go see it. Please join us just across the way here in the NEMA. Before we go there, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Katie and her team for helping facilitate this, and thank you so much for coming tonight. It's a very important topic, and it's a really, really impactful exhibit today. So go see it and enjoy, and thanks so much. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.